Obviously enough, we are at San Diego Comic-Con. How could you miss it? And I have the distinct pleasure to speak with Richard Garriott and Starr Long. And gamers out there are going to be very, very familiar with these names. And we're going to talk about a big, big release that's coming up. I know longtime gamers, I'm showing my age now, are really super pumped. But first off, I have to say, Richard, I have met plenty of people who are spaced out, but I have never spoken with someone who's been to outer space.
Indeed. Well, you know, that's I was very lucky to parlay my longevity and reasonable success in the gaming industry to do a lot of exploring, including in 2008. I made a little off-planet sojourn to spend 2 weeks up on the International Space Station, which I'm sure you can understand was a pinnacle life experience.
Of course. Well, your father was a NASA astronaut.
Yeah, that's right. Yeah, he's a traditional astronaut.
Right.
And there are now 7 of us who have flown privately. But yeah, he flew on Skylab as well as the 9th launch of the space shuttle. So, you know, I think while all kids dream one day of going into space, you know, when your family and neighbors are all involved in it, that dream kind of sinks in a little deeper.
Sure, right.
And but when I was young, they told me because I needed glasses, I wasn't eligible to go with NASA. So I decided to make my own space program.
Take that, NASA.
Exactly. But it worked. It ultimately worked. Yeah.
And as far as I understand, Starr, you have been kind of a business partner, creative partner with Richard for quite some time.
Yeah, so 25 years ago, I actually answered an ad in the newspaper that said video game testers wanted, which my friends and I were convinced was not a real job, that I would show up and there would be guys in lab coats that would say, oh, okay, thank you for showing up for our psychology experiment. You're the kind of person who would show up for this. But it was a job at his company. And a few years later, he mistakenly entrusted me to make my first game. Entrusted me to make my first game, which was Ultima Online, which was one of the very first massively multiplayer games ever. And he and I have been working together ever since, except for a very brief stint where I was at Walt Disney Company. And then when they did the Kickstarter for Shroud of the Avatar back in April 2013, Richard called me up and said, hey, we're doing this Kickstarter, and imagine a game that's Ultima Online plus the single-player Ultimas in a mashup, and when you'd like to do that and work together again, Lynn and McCartney back together, and I said, well, if the Kickstarter is successful, I'm in. If you guys raise the funds, and then
if not, don't call me.
No, that's basically what I said. You can ask him.
He actually did take a pay cut to come back to Texas, so
we
had he wanted to at least make sure there was some pay at the other end.
Right.
Yeah, exactly.
And speaking of the Kickstarter, well, before we jump into the Kickstarter and start talking about the game, I have to share always a funny story. Years ago, when everything wasn't all first person, Ultima Underworld came out.
Yep.
And I'll never forget, I'm playing it, and my fiance at the time was watching, I don't know, Dr. Quinn, Medicine Woman, whatever she was watching on TV, and I'm playing, I'm going through an area, I'm like, oh, I cleared everything out. And I turn a corner, and there was like a monster there. And of course, we're not talking like VR these days, but still, I fell out of the chair. I was like, ah! She's like, what happened? What's going on? And I'm like, it's just the game. Don't worry, don't worry. So let's talk about Shroud of the Avatar, because most people are familiar with you both because of the fantastic and legendary, critically acclaimed Ultima role-playing games.
Well, and what's interesting is after Ultima Online, despite its phenomenal success, it was the fastest-selling PC game in Origin in EA history. It outsold all the previous Ultimas combined by some significant multiple. Don't remember even how much. And despite that success, EA wasn't yet convinced that massively multiplayer games were a thing. And so it meant that all of our teams sort of eventually wandered out. That's why I left, Starr left. Even we were going to do a Wing Commander Online. Those people all left and did Star Wars Galaxies for Sony. So it was sort of a unfortunate kind of breakup. But at that time, the last thing we wanted to do when we went independent was go compete with ourselves, what we had just done. And so we sort of took a hiatus from medieval fantasy and MMOs, and then what we found interesting is over the last decade, everyone has sort of been chasing the EverQuest and World of Warcraft model of MMOs, usually not to great success. I mean, World of Warcraft is a damn good game, and
but 20 clones of it are not damn good games.
Are not damn good games, or even frankly, even if one was 10% better, you're still not going to knock people off of the position they were in. And so since no one was sort of picking up where we had left off, no one was picking the Ultima model, this model of deep sandbox where roles, where everyone is not forced to be a combatant. There are people who can have rich, deep lives that have nothing to do with combat, that might be crafters or just straight up role players. And so we saw this as an opportunity. We said, look, we'd only stepped away for a while just to get a breath of fresh air.
Sure, right.
And we felt there was still a blue ocean of our style untouched. And so that's why we got back together and said, let's go back and showcase why that vision was great, why this model is great, like I said, the sandbox and deep roles, and let's refix some of the design problems that games like WoW tried to fix, but we're doing them in a way that we believe makes it less brain dead. Mm-hmm. And what I mean by that is role-playing games in general have all become these things where you run through the world and hunt for exclamation points over people's heads. You blindly click on whatever it is they have to say until the important information is in a quest log. Sure. You highlight the quest and there's an arrow to follow on the map until you get to the level 1 hunting grounds. And then you repeat. You just sort of repeat this level grinding behavior, and level is what gates access to more and more content. So you have to do it in order to even traverse the land. And those features were put in to make the game more accessible to a mass audience compared to the early Ultimas where you had to write notes and draw maps. Right. But we said, look, we can fix those problems and still leave you mentally engaged. And so we have a long list of features that we believe do that bring a modern spin on deeper role-playing that we think is very powerful.
And one thing that always kind of turns me off with MMOs is the grinding. Just the grinding. Oh, yes, I have to go kill another 30 of these guys so I can possibly get 10 pieces of their hide so I can go. And I know some people dig that. I think they're insane. But I could see where you're looking at, because you're really not mentally engaged. It becomes just a click fest. And that's kind of clock out. Yeah,
that's right. In fact, Starr can probably tell you a little bit about some of the, even down to combat mechanics. The shortcut bar has often become just a damage over time min-maxing process, and we have a very new solution to combat, amongst other things that we think helps you keep you more mentally engaged.
Starr, let's talk about that. Let's talk about some of the features. First off, what are some of the features that longtime gamers like myself who remember the Ultima, all the different Ultima games, plus younger gamers who have probably heard from people over the years, oh, you missed out when you didn't play Ultima. What can they be looking for as some of the features?
Well, so one of the things that kind of sets the game apart, I think, is that in most role-playing games, it's either a single-player game or it's a multiplayer game. Mm-hmm. It's not really both. And in our game, you actually have a selector that lets you decide, do I want to play the game as an offline single-player game and play the story that Richard wrote with Tracy Hickman, the guy who wrote the Dragonlance and the Ravenloft games. Yeah. And so Richard and Tracy wrote this amazing, beautiful story that's very much like the old school Ultimas where your choices matter and you have to make these really sort of ethical choices about, am I making the right choice? And every time you're going, it feels pretty gray here, and it's great. It makes you think, and you actually have to read what the NPCs are saying. You can't just blindly click because, you can blindly click, but then you're going to make a choice that's, and there's children involved and weird things and stuff like that. But you can play that as a single-player offline game, but then you can play online as well. And even in the online modes, you can play as an open MMO, and everyone plays on one server. So there are no server selection. But if you want, you can also play single-player online, where you're still logged into the servers, but you're playing by yourself. And if you want to just play the story, but you're still seeing like everything that other players have put in the world. Like if they put a shop down, you can buy things from their vendor. You can dial it right between those two, which is I just want to play with my friends in an adventuring party, and so we call that like friends mode. Sure. And that we call that whole set of features selective multiplayer, and that we think that's a very unique way. Basically, you select, I want to play how I want to play. The other thing is that story on top of that really deep sandbox is very few games have that. Really only Elder Scrolls Online is the only other game that sort of has that mix of a really deep story and a sandbox. The other thing, a decision we made really early on was most games, the best gear in the game is generated by the game. So you talked about that grind. So you have to go find the boss, and you and your guild have to go kill that boss a gazillion times, and then each time you get that one thing, and then you're like, okay, who gets it this time? You get the you get the sword this time, and then you go kill it again, and then okay, now you get the sword. Right. And in our game, the craftsmen, the players, make the best gear. And so, yes, you go kill big, bad bosses, but what you're killing them for is rare ingredients, or you're going and harvesting those ingredients from the world, and then craftsmen make the best gear. And so it's a completely player-driven economy. We decided early on we're going to remove ourselves from that equation and let the players make the best stuff. And again, we don't know anybody who's really doing that.
Right.
Yeah, and so I think that's going to create a very different experience for most people who play these games.
And it was interesting talking about how you have to constantly wait for the big boss to respawn and everything else. A lot of times, for myself personally, and I'm sure I'm not alone, there are a lot of people out there who, your friends don't have the same schedule, so you're playing online by yourself, and then you're forced to have to finish up a quest and basically beg strangers to help you finish up a quest. And sometimes you'd get stuck going on a quest, and then you get screwed in the end. They take off with the loot you need or whatever, right.
Well, and that's the beauty of being able to play in these different modes, is that you get to decide that based on your schedule. And if your friends happen to be online, then you can switch into that friends mode, or you can switch into just playing by yourself. And the game adjusts the difficulty level, the spawn rates, etc., based on the mode that you're selected.
And if I can throw one thought on there too,
sure.
Another thing this selective multiplayer allows us to do is the game can choose to throttle on its own. And the way that's used is, let's suppose the king is sending people on the quest for the Holy Grail. Mm-hmm. Well, if you're in an MMO and you're supposed to bring back the Holy Grail to the king, and you're in a queue of 100 other people standing before the king to bring back the same supposed Holy Grail,
sure.
That's not particularly exciting for you to be one of many. Right. And that's one of the desires of playing a solo player game, is so you can feel special despite the fact your neighbor feels special independently. And so what our game can do is we can create the throne room, or the whole castle, or the whole town, as a place where, as you're moving from a massively multiplayer setting, the closer you get to the throne room, the more we start culling out strangers and other people. We can go from a massively multiplayer area to a party-based area to a solo place area. And so there's just be guards at the door saying, who goes there? Only one. Only you have the ability to talk to the king right now. And when you go in, you now get a private space to go get your knighthood or whatever the king might want to do for you to make you feel special. And so the fact that our game, both you can slide it, you can make it more solo player, or the game can make it more solo player, means that we have the ability to do much richer storytelling while playing in a game that is like a massively multiplayer game.
And you did extremely well crowdfunding the project. I think it brought in like $30, $40.
40,
something around that.
Yeah.
Let's start dividing.
You have to do the math.
From my understanding, I believe it was the second highest amount of funds that were actually brought in by a video game. 11.8 million, was it?
Exactly. Yeah, in fact, we are honestly very proud to be the second highest crowdfunded game. We always like to point out the fact that we are a distant number second. Our friends over at Cloud Imperium have raised something like $130 million, so 10 times more than we have for Star Citizen, and very deservedly so. It's a beautiful game, and Chris does some really brilliant work.
It really does.
But we are number 2.
Yes.
And we try harder, so to speak. And but no, we are very, very thankful to our community that have not only helped our Kickstarter go very well 4 years ago, but have continued to support the game. And we're now at a very interesting point. You mentioned, at the very beginning how we're approaching release. And so we actually are projecting we're going to get it out this calendar year. So we're literally months now away from its release. And that, I think, is really important from a number of vantage points. One, it'll just be nice to reach the finish line, of course.
Sure, right.
But another important part is, as I look back at my career, and I've had a long enough 40-plus year career to see a good number of successes and a couple of hiccups along the way. And as I look back and analyze, the games I'm happiest with, how they were launched and how they sold, and how I just like the game versus the ones that are the opposite, the ones that had a rougher launch or I'm just not as happy with, they have a kind of a universal aspect to those two ends of the spectrum. If you have a development process that goes relatively smooth throughout, and you get to the end and have this last time to polish the game, universally it goes well.
Yes.
On the other hand, if you are arguing with your publisher as to what the game should be,
right,
and you are forced to get it out the door before you've had that polish opportunity, it will go poorly.
Sure.
And in our case, we are now in that last 20%. And I actually think that, not just for us, I think in all computer games being developed, 80% of what the player believes is quality goes into that game in the last 20% of time.
I believe that.
Because otherwise, all you're doing for the first 80% of the time is just roughly shoving stuff together to get all the systems present. You're not trying to balance them. You're not exploiting all the special connections to make an event that showcases that strongly. And you only do that, you only can do that when you have all the pieces working together and you're in that polished period of the last 20%.
Where you can make sure that everything's going to mesh perfectly.
To sing, it's where it really feels like not just a game, but a great game. And we're in that mode right now. We've got all the systems in place. We're fleshing out a few spells and a few, skills, and got plenty of bugs to fix.
Sure.
But we're now to the point where literally the discussions we have on our own here, like discussions over dinner last night and breakfast this morning, are all things about going, okay, here's some low-hanging fruit between these two pieces. Here's something about the game that doesn't feel like we intended it to feel. How can we punch that up or replace it? And that's a very exciting time as a developer, and I'm confident that the players will also be pleased with the results.
And I'll bring Starr back into the conversation a little bit. As far as it's closing in on release, is there an open access right now for folks?
So we actually have a free
early access.
Yes, so we're still in early access testing, and we did our Kickstarter in April 2013. That very same year in November, we started letting our backers play the game. So just a few months later, and we've been doing monthly releases ever since, and we've done 43 monthly releases since that time on the last Thursday of the month, and we've at 10:30 a.m. and we've never been late. The latest we've ever been is, so we're on PC, Mac, and Linux, and one of those releases, the Mac version, was late by 20 minutes because we had a compiler.
Oh, that's it. Interviews
yeah,
over.
I know, it's terrible. But very proud of my team at the discipline, and so we plan to do those monthly releases after we launch forever. So once we go live, we're going to be doing those monthly releases on the last Thursday of the month forever with new content, bug fixes.
My last question is, how far out have you kind of game plan the pipeline?
So we actually have a 5-episode plan. So the first episode will launch at the end of the year. And to go back to your original question, we actually have a free trial going on right now. That's going to.
What was that? Free?
Free. That's going to go through.
You got to remember, you're talking to the press. We hear free. It's like our ears.
I know.
Free.
So we actually do free trials every month for about 3 weeks. So the current one will run till the 26th of July. We'll be doing another free trial in August as well for about 3 weeks, about the middle of the month. And we do those every month just to get more people just trying out the game and giving us feedback. It's real right now, since we're still in early access, those free trials are more about testing the systems.
Sure.
But then even when we go live with the commercial launch, we always plan to have this free trial. Okay. It's got a slightly limited feature set than the real version because our business model is kind of pay once and play forever. It's based on the original Guild Wars model. Mm-hmm. So there's no ongoing subscription fee. It's just $40 and you have access to everything. There's
microtransaction?
There is an add-on store, but it's all like fluff, like extra costumes and bigger houses, and
Floral shirts,
yeah,
Hawaiian shirts. I got it all.
We haven't got one of those in yet.
no Hawaiian shirt. There are.
There's a reason behind this shirt. Share off camera.
It's a very flowery shirt. Everything that's in the store, there's an equivalent in the game. So every house, every piece of clothing, there are versions of that in the game that you can get. And in fact, in the offline version of the game, everything that's in the store you can get with in-game gold.
Okay.
So you actually don't have to make even those extra add-on store items are in the offline version for in-game gold.
So it's not necessarily a pay-to-win situation.
Oh, absolutely not a pay-to-win. There is no, there is no power purchase of any kind. We are very one of the reasons we went with the pay $40 for the entrance fee and not a freemium model was we didn't want to put ourselves in a position where, as we were building out the business model, we put in things like, well, shorten the time to do something by paying a little more, or hit a paywall where you can't go to this section of the game without paying that. Because that's what those kinds of business models force you to start thinking about, and we absolutely didn't want that. And that's why we also made it so in that offline version, because we wanted the game to feel like old school RPGs where there was no store ever, right? That's why we have all those store items in the offline version, because we want it to very much feel like you're playing Ultima like you did back in the 90s.
Fantastic. Any final thoughts either of you would like to share with our audience?
Yeah, so we're a crowdfunded title, so all the money that funds our game is from our backers, who are amazing. The fact that crowdfunding exists is such an exciting time for creators like ourselves, because we have this very open relationship with them. We post what we're working on every single day onto our forums.
Transparency is very important.
Yeah, because we wanted them to know that their money is being spent in a very responsible way. And now crowdfunding is evolving into this new state that because last year they started allowing what's called equity crowdfunding, where backers can even start investing in the company. And we're running an equity crowdfunding campaign right now that ends on the 7th, and where backers can actually invest in our company. And that money, the money we've collected so far in traditional crowdfunding is all gone into development of the game. Like we intentionally didn't spend any of our backers' money on any kind of marketing or advertising. We didn't even buy a sign for our company, because that's how we often have this joke of like, okay, we had a good month, let's buy a fancy sign, because we always, that's the big joke of like when companies are about to fail, is they just whenever they buy a big fancy sign. But we're doing this equity crowdfunding campaign because since we're getting closer to launch, we want money to start doing user acquisition and marketing and fancy trailers and things like that to get people excited. And so that's what that campaign is, and it's on a platform called Seed Invest. And so people can still just buy the game on Steam or directly on our website, but if they would like to invest in our future, they can go to Seed Invest and find out more.
Very nice. Richard, any final thoughts?
No, I was saying, yeah, come join us, be our bosses. Come buy a chunk. Be our bosses. Come buy a chunk of the company and tell us how to make your game.
Excellent. And as more information as far as the final release for Shroud of the Avatar becomes available, our audience out there is going to have it. So, Starr Long, Richard Garriott, thank you so much for taking some time out at the really quiet and empty Comic-Con.
There's nobody here. There's nobody here.
Yeah. By the way, this is really an amazing event. I'm sure you've been showing your audience.
This is our 5th year of covering the show. So
wow, it's our first San Diego Comic-Con. We've been to other regional Comic-Cons. This is a madhouse. It is incredibly impressive. We're very, very happy to be here, and hope you all enjoy the show.